Hello and welcome to the first episode of Savage Garden and Interview the Vampire podcast. I am Kat and I am joined as always by Naomi as we delve into the beautiful bloody love story that is Interview the Vampire. And today, as I say, this is the first episode and we're kicking off with the very first episode, which is In Throes of Increasing Wonder. Naomi, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And what an amazing title. I mean, what I love about the show is that their titles are so sort of purple prose and so gothic and so incredible. It's not like we're not just talking episode one here. We're talking about In Throes of Increasing Wonder. Amazing. I do think this is one of the best pilots of recent years. It's written by Rolin Jones, who's of course the showrunner, and directed by Alan Taylor, who also directed the second episode and has to date not done another episode. So he kind of came along, set the standard, set the tone for what the series was going to be, and then departed.
It's always interesting when people do that because it's kind of like you think if you were there at the start, that then it becomes your baby and you want to make sure that, the people that follow you don't mess it up or, you might want to come back to kind of assert your dominance. But no, this guy has just kind of pieced out at this point.
Yeah, I feel like he came in, he set the standard for what everybody else had to follow, and it is a beautifully, beautifully directed episode. It has some of my favorite scenes in the entire show in it. Um, and visually and everything else, it is stunning. And then he did the second episode follow up and then has kind of, yeah, just set his mark and then departed and left it for everybody else to run with from there, which I love. Just kind of uh, set the standard for everyone else. And then was like, right, I'm out of here. My job is done.
What I find really interesting is that you say, it's such a strong pilot. It's one of the strongest in a number of years. But looking at the IMDb rankings, this is ranked at number 10 out of all 15 episodes that we've had so far. So I guess that's I guess that speaks to the quality of then what follows. It already starts so high, but then when you end up ranking them episode by episode, it somehow tumbles down to, kind of the lower third of the pack.
That's so weird. I mean, ranking is really hard because it's one story told over two seasons. And when I was rewatching it last night, I mean, we'll get into it as we talk through it, but there are things that they pick up in the very first episode that only really have resonance episodes later. Is the degree that Roland Jones kind of sets these things out. But yeah, I think that obviously the two-part series two finale has to be absolutely up there. The series one finale is very, very strong indeed. But then this would definitely come a sort of around there. I feel like we're talking, this is like your top five episodes, if not top three. The fact that it's kind of, I mean, the IMDb rankings are wild anyway, but to think that this is ranked lower than some of the others that follows is insane. But also, as you said, shows just how passionate people are about the series and how much they love individual episodes. I think that everyone has champions their own individual episodes as we go through. I mean, I don't especially love the episode with young Daniel, although it has one of the best and most quoted scenes ever in the world. But I do think that everyone, is very, very passionate about it. And I think that's one of the great things about this show is that there is so much to read into it and the characters are so strong. And I think that, the fans that love it truly, truly love it.
And were you hooked after this first episode? Because I know that sometimes with TV shows it'll take like two or three episodes for people to kind of go, oh, okay, or yeah, but I'll give it another episode, and then you're like episode 6 or 7, like, oh no, now it clicks into place. Was this that for you, or was this like immediate? Yes, I want to see what follows because this has been so good.
Yeah, I was hooked from the moment Jacob Anderson appears on screen. I feel like this comes straight out of the gate. There are some shows, particularly in the streaming area, where it can take 3, 4, 5 episodes to get into it. No, this is there pretty much from minute one, I think, because the degree of quality, the writing, and I think obviously the most important element is the absolutely insane chemistry between Jacob Anderson and Sam Reid, which, I mean, it's there in spades in this particular episode, but I think it just hooks you from the get-go. So yeah, I was all in because obviously you're always a bit worried because we had a decent enough film, but that feels like a really long time ago. And very much a film of its era in that, it's about as homoerotic as Tom Cruise will ever be able to get in a film, but it's still very straight washed. And obviously, we have a ridiculously brilliant Claudia in Kirsten Dunst, and then we have the very cheesy Queen of the Damned film. And so a TV series could be dreadful. I remember reading Sam Reid gave an interview about when he was at San Diego Comic Con this year, saying that before they sort of debuted any of it at the first San Diego Comic Con they went to, he was backstage, like basically feeling like he wanted to die because he was so terrified about how the audience was going to react. And I can understand because this could have gone horribly wrong. I mean, this could have gone so wrong, particularly I think if they had chosen to keep the setting of the plantation slave owner. I mean, I feel like it would have just been, and I know that there are still some like Anne Rice diehards who don't particularly love the changes that have been made to the characters, but I feel that if they had done a much more dutiful adaptation, as and we already have that in the film is a very good adaptation of the book. I feel if they kept much more akin to the novel, I don't think it would have flown in this day and age. I mean, who wants to watch Louis as a slave owner? I mean, they changed that to him being a pimp, which is interesting. And they don't really, I feel like as Louis progresses, because of the horrors that we get through, we kind of forget that for years he made his money through pimping women out. Because it's just kind of, I mean, that's the whole thing. Nobody's good in this show. Nobody's brilliant. They're all just messy, messy people getting through life. But I would have had zero interest in watching a white slave owner on a plantation. That would have been
Yeah.
horrific.
Yeah, I think there's the period setting as well of
Yes.
the plantation
In-
and stuff. Obviously it works in the film, but we've seen a lot of, stuffy sort of like corset dramas and things. I think, in switching it up to, sort of like the turn of the last century,
yeah.
it gives something that it's very much, some roles have been changed, we are obviously in a more modern time, but it's still that same story just distilled into a time period where I guess normally when we see it, it is very much focused on, the war, or, or something in that vein. So it's quite nice to kind of see this side of New Orleans.
Yeah, and I think bringing it forward to 1910, to the Jim Crow era, having obviously Louis being an African American man instead of a white guy, also helps with him always feeling secondary to Lestat because that becomes such a key thing. As the series plays out, we see that both Louis and Claudia feel that Lestat is withholding information from them that will allow them to grow, and he is, because as we will see, he is completely and utterly terrified of abandonment, and he is replaying kind of the generational trauma that he has with his mother, in that she wouldn't teach him to read. She kind of kept him behind in order to keep him close to her, and so he does the same because he feels that if he gives Louis and Claudia the knowledge that they need, they will spread their wings and leave him, which is what they ultimately do because they have to. But like, if he was a sensible human being capable of like polite conversation with the people that he truly loves, we wouldn't have been in this mess, would we, now, Lestat? He's a very frustrating character. I love him so much, but he's very frustrating. But yeah, I feel that the update is a brilliant idea, and it sort of enhances the themes of the books. If we get into it, I love the opening titles. I love the beautiful Daniel Hart's music, and we have the sort of the juxtaposition of the Dubai and the New Orleans skylines, and that changes throughout the series. Because in series 2, we get the Paris skyline. And every time I've told somebody to watch the show, I have to kind of add a caveat of just stick with it for the first 5 minutes because it's not an Eric Bogosian masterclass. It changes very quickly because I always forget that it starts with that. Because it's such a wild decision to start it with, the Daniel Malloy masterclass. I guess to show how much Daniel's life has changed. And obviously Eric Bogosian, absolutely, I think the MVP of the series. Uh, fantastic actor, fantastic actor. I loved him in Uncut Gems. He is astonishing in this. Very attractive, silver haired grey fox. Love him. And we start off with him in his apartment, and we sort of see his loneliness as well, which I think is interesting. And what do you think of the decision to age up Daniel?
I think originally, so when I went into it, I did no reading and I just knew it was Interview the Vampire. So when we had the change in Louis' time period, I was like, okay. And then similarly with Daniel, I was expecting it to be a more straight adaptation, kind of retreading the ground we saw in the film. And I think that was one of the things that made me a little reticent to give it a chance because I've seen the film.
Yeah,
I don't need to see it again. And then because and how are they gonna how are they gonna get around this? And then it's okay, it's the same character, he's just older. That film interview, kind of, it did happen, like, kind of
yeah,
in an old
yeah. No,
universe
it did.
sort of way. And here he is now, and I think it helps sell the fact that Daniel immediately kind of like buys into Louis being a vampire, because when he's a young man interviewing him, it's parlor tricks almost. You can,
Yeah,
when you're that high on drugs, you can be like, no,
yeah.
that was just on drugs. But then to now, all these years later, he hasn't aged a day. I think that is, the way of confirming to the audience that no, this story is legit.
I think it also makes, because from minute one, you know, Louis says, "Let the tail seduce you," but he doesn't need the tail to seduce him, because Daniel is older. He's got Parkinson's. He's very flippant about the fact, yeah, I'm going to die, because death is obviously
Mm.
such a huge theme of the series. But he's not flippant about it, really. He is an old man with Parkinson's. Mortality is slapping him in the face. And he is talking to this ridiculously handsome young man who is not aged a day. There is no illness, nothing touches him. No wonder he leaves his house in the middle of a pandemic to go and see him. Because of course he does. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you have a second chance to try and touch that? I mean, even if he knows that, I mean, we'll get to series 2 and where Daniel ends up. But even if he doesn't know that from the first minute, why would he not want to spend some of his last remaining time learning more about the vampire world, learning more about it? And the fact that he has much more life experience, that he has children now, he has much more of a greater appreciation of life. So I think he can understand Louis' story much more in a way that he never could. Well, as you said, when he was on uh, high and talking to some random guy in a bar who he probably thinks is just full of nonsense. Now it's very, very different. He has much more of an appreciation of life. And more importantly, he can stand up to Louis. The whole way through this, doesn't take any shit from Louis whatsoever. He calls him out repeatedly. I think that's what Louis needs. And I think that's when it comes to the main question of the series, which I think it takes us until the series 2 finale to consider, which is, why does Louis want this second interview? I love how old school he is, sending the tapes in this beautiful handwritten letter to Daniel. But why do you think Louis, after years, suddenly decides, hey, you know what? Let's get Daniel back.
Do you know, I think I'm trying to. It's been a little while since I watched it, but I feel like there's allusions at some point to maybe Daniel isn't the only person that Louis has told his story to, but there's obviously just something about Daniel. I think probably is that thing of he will push back, where I guess other people are like, "Oh my God, it's a vampire! I'm terrified." Yes, sir. I'll write down whatever you say, sir. But the fact that Daniel, is more argumentative and challenges Louis' outlook on life, he's just a better interviewer, I guess. You want somebody to tell your life story. Why not somebody that's going to tell it the best?
Yeah, I agree. For me, the way I've kind of rationalized it is that I think Louis, at the point at which he calls to Daniel, I think he's realized that there is something off about his life.
Yeah.
I feel like he is sort of floating through life, almost like just treading water, and he knows that something is wrong. And I don't think Daniel tells Louis anything that Louis doesn't already know. This isn't a question of a white savior coming in and, educating Louis. What I think it does is that Daniel and his inability to kind of just take everything at face value, because they bothered to stress several times that Daniel is a Pulitzer Prize winning investigative journalist. I think that speaking to Daniel allows him to realize things he always knew, and realizes him allows him to come to the place of, as he says, truth and reconciliation that he is at the end of the second series. And it's not that Daniel magically found things out for him that he didn't know. I think he needed somebody else, an independent third party, to kind of sit down and go, oh, actually, yeah, this is all a bunch of lies. This is what happened. It takes him a very long time to get there. We have to talk about the lovely Jacob Anderson, who gets the most incredible hero shot introduction with his beautiful green eyes. And I think they can see, and I can't imagine they can see anything out of those contacts.
No.
I mean, they are very startling. They're very green in this, but they kind of go, they sort of do flitter. I feel like they're grey, but sometimes, but maybe that's just me. But they are very bright, and I love how we get the sort of the two different Louis in this episode, between the Louis in modern day Dubai and the Louis back in 1910 New Orleans. And in the modern times, he's very much dressed like a tech billionaire. He's got kind of the hoodie. When anyone is dressed that simply, that everything he's wearing costs an absolute fortune. And he's speaking this very sort of carefully cultured, meditative tone. And anyone that I've ever seen or met that speaks like that, it's kind of very sort of therapy speak. You just know that these are the people that are going to snap in 4 seconds flat when things go wrong. There is this, it's like, you're not kidding me, Louis. There is just this sort of like undertone of incredible violence, I think, from the first moment you see him. Because someone who has tried that hard to be this kind of neutral in everything that they say and their movements, there's going to be a lot going on underneath. I could talk for hours about that appalling, terrible Dubai apartment, but I feel that's more for series 2, when it's a little more reflective of the relationship that's going on within it. But the set design is by a lady called, and I really hope I'm pronouncing this right, Mara Pierre Schlup, and it is beautiful. The whole thing, the degree of effort that is into it. I was looking at because in the first episode we see the beautiful triptych of paintings behind Daniel, just called The Three Studies for Figures at the Base of a Crucifixion by Francis Bacon. And the images, I think, have such resonance for the story. But if you go through and you look up the list of artworks, she has snuck in paintings from Degas, from Van Gogh throughout they're just kind of like hidden in the background of their house in Rue Royale and various different places. Of course, Louis' appreciation of art becomes such a huge element of it. But they're in everything. I mean, the degree of minuscule detail that these guys have gone into is just insane. It's incredible. It's a beautifully, beautifully crafted series. It is clinically insane for Louis to live in a glass coffin where, one tiny crack in the window can incinerate him instantly. Yeah. Louis, I don't feel you're well, to be frank. He's not a well boy. But it's just as well that he has Rashid to help him.
Yeah, good old Rashid.
Helpful Rashid. I realized actually he doesn't even get a name in the pilot.
No.
In the pilot, we know he's Rashid. Well, we know he's Rashid from the later episodes, but he is not even named in the first episode, which is a very clever decision. He's just there, hovering. What a sweet little angel Rashid is.
Yep, hovering and overstepping with his master.
Hopping and overstepping with his master at every stage, clad in black, looking like the beautiful angel that he is. But yeah, he is in every scene. And again, when you could rewatch, you're like, oh, he really is in every scene. He is controlling everything. He doesn't want this, he doesn't want that. And I mean, the fact I still cannot get over Louis living in this place with these tinted windows, where if something goes wrong, he will die, but Rashid won't. He'll be just fine because he can withstand sunlight. It's yeah, it's such a horrifically uneven power dynamic from the get-go, but we don't find that out for several episodes. But it is very, very clever. And there's a reference when they get poor Daniel there. They call him our boy, which is very insulting. But again, insane foreshadowing. That doesn't pay off.
Yeah.
That doesn't pay off for episodes. Um, Rolin Jones is a madman, and he has thought of every single line.
Especially as, a first series of anything, you don't necessarily know if you're going to get a second series. And as you say, some of this foreshadowing is foreshadowing stuff that we don't see until, series 2. And so to slip that in, not knowing you were going to get a second season that's really bold.
Yeah, I mean, he blew the budget on the extras in the episode where Lestat mind fucks them out of the apartment purely because he knew that it was essential for the second series finale. Again, insane to have that degree of setup is so meticulous and so detailed. Um, Hugely impressive. Then we switch to the beautiful, vibrant 1910 New Orleans. Everyone looks amazing. I love that they really take their time introducing Lestat. He doesn't speak
Mm.
until minute 17. We see him early on, and we don't see him with a full reveal of his face until Louis pulls the knife on Paul. And that's it's a really interesting one, that, because of course he sees that and he makes the decision then about Louis's character that turns out to be completely wrong. He sees
Mm.
him and he thinks that, this is a guy that can handle anything and can handle being my companion for the rest of my life. And poor old Louis is not a well boy. He's plagued by, you know, guilt over his sexuality, over his family, over everything. And the pimp that he's pretending to be in Storyville is just not who he is. It's kind of sad.
One of the interesting differences between the film and the TV show is that in the film, when Louis sort of begins his story, he's like, I was 24, but I was a man back then. Which, I mean, there's no way that I believe that Brad Pitt is 24 in
No,
Interview with
no,
the
no.
Vampire, Stuck Forever. And I think it's smart here, that they've made Louis 33. One,
Yeah,
because it's a harder age to discern on an actor. So if you're going to be trapped that way for several seasons, you're not going to necessarily age too much over that time period. But also, it instantly outs Louis as being strange, because in that era, especially by 33, as a man, you probably would
yeah,
have a wife and children. So it's already just him saying that he was 33, and then you see him and he's, a bachelor still. Even before we've met Lestat, you've got that bubbling under the surface of,
yeah,
okay, so what is he, what is his story?
yeah, absolutely. And he can couch it and hide it in that he's been too busy looking after his family. But you're absolutely right. He would have been married in his mid-20s by then. He would have been married and would have had children, and he doesn't. And we see him in his beautiful brown outfits, looking phenomenal. Taking care of his horrible family. I mean, I quite like Grace, but they are a really interesting family because they are shown as horrific hypocrites from minute one, because they are benefiting from Louis owning a variety of whorehouses. His mother, in particular, is sitting there all fancy and making all sort of critical judgments. And you're right, Louis, from the second we are introduced to him, is shown as being slightly outside of this family unit. There is this slight undercurrent, an undertone, because, well, Mama Louie clearly knows what her son is. I would imagine she's fully aware of his sexuality, but it's one of these things that would never have been discussed. And so, they're just always talking about Grace and her wedding, and Louis is always very much on the outskirts of this circle. And then, of course, he falls into Lestat's sort of radar. And apart from that, the racism he's dealing with from all of these men is horrific. It's a terrible, terrible thing. And trying to see Louis trying to thrive amidst this sort of horrific uh, condescension from everyone that he's surrounded by Tom Anderson, by the alderman. We first see him, he's trying to help the alderman and he calls him that horrific slut. And this is the kind of the world in which Louis is trying to live in, and that Lestat never really gets and understands, because he still sees it as, he sees racism as silly human nonsense that Louis, once he becomes a vampire, should have almost sort of transcended. And he never fully gets or understands, I think, what Louis is going through in that way, because how could he? I don't think he could. He's an aristocratic, if a very poor, Frenchman. This is all slightly beyond him, and he's living in a world that he doesn't quite understand. And I also love that they depict that. I mean, we see the first time we see Lestat, he's in very outdated clothing. We see him in the sort of the black frock coat, which all of Sam Reid's clothes they have tailored to within an inch of their lives. I mean, that man cannot be allowed to eat a big lunch. I mean, they are so tailored to emphasize, because he has a real shoulder to waist ratio in terms of the way that his body is. And they make full advantage of that with the beautiful clothing design. I think it's Caroline Cutzel is the costume designer. But yeah, that waist is just accentuated in every single costume. And we first see him in the sort of almost looking like something out of Nosferatu, isn't he? Because we see the back shot of him in the frock coat. And then we get the full reveal of him with his little bob and his hair extensions. And just looking very otherworldly, I think. And then we don't see him until that first very fun scene of him and Louis at the fair play with Lily.
Yeah, it's a great scene. Because I mean, Lestat just immediately starts flirting with Louis. He's not necessarily doing it in the best way, but his intentions are immediately clear, I think, to everybody at that table.
I think, yeah, but to everyone at that table apart from Louis, which I think is the funniest thing, because Lily sits down and clocks it instantly. She is more than happy to profit from Lestat eye fucking the hell out of Louis whilst almost making Louis comfortable. It's almost like Lestat feels like he can't just ignore Lily, because if he does that, Louis is going to run, because they are
Yeah,
there for one thing. They are there for the women. Louis is not. Louis is there to keep up appearances. And we find in the later scene that Lily says that she and Louis only ever speak, because obviously he's not interested in her. And I'm always really, really sad that Lily dies in the first episode, because she's great. She's so understanding and she clocks everything instantly. She's been there for Louis. She's very happy, politely bearding with him and taking his money. Because, God, why would you not? Imagine being in that life and having a client that pays you to not do anything. Oh my God. If I was Lily, Louis would have been my favorite client in the world. And Lestat sits down, immediately feeling her up. First thing out of his mouth is to insult Louis. Just to say, how did you get through the door effectively? And he doesn't even mean to insult him, but man is an idiot. And then he's feeling up Lily while just not even taking his eyes off Louis. I mean, obscene. Anyone watching them would have clocked. And yet I feel like Louis is just spellbound. I mean, only Lestat could appear, and within 30 seconds of seeing this man tell him he's his destiny and mean it. And
yeah,
absolutely, without a second, when mean it. I mean, that's just a lot, Lestat. Like, tone it down a bit, mate. It's like the guys when you go on a date with and they tell you they love you in 30 seconds. And it is only because it is gothic horror. And Rolin Jones manages, I think, so brilliantly to pull the thread of that, because it is too much. It's silly. You can't sit down and tell a man that he's your St. Louis and your destiny within 20 seconds. and it be treated seriously, but it works.
Definitely does.
It get into a dick swinging contest where they try and buy Lily, which was never going to work, Louis. Obviously, the French guy with a huge amount of money is going to win that one. But yeah, I got a little bit because I may have a cold, dead heart, but I did get a little bit choked up when we see Louis give Daniel Lestat's business card because it means, again, at the point at which he has given this interview, he has kept that for years, despite everything that happens in the meantime. And I was like, oh, he kept it. It means so much to
Yeah,
him.
I admit that this was my third watch of the pilot. It will be my third watch of the first series, and it completely sort of passed me by that little moment in both of the previous times. But yeah, it's like everything that we go to learn about what happens to Louis in his life and the continents that he crosses and stuff. He has always kept hold of this card. It's been what, like 100 years. He's lived through wars, and yet still that is something that he has felt sacred enough to keep hold of. And it is just like, oh,
Yeah. No, I mean, I get like fully choked up thinking about it because you're right. Because he is obviously, because when he leaves New Orleans at the end of series one, he takes virtually nothing with him, but he's got the business card and he's kept that business card. I mean, we could say that maybe he's retrieved it afterwards, but no, I don't think so. I think Louis kept that. I think it was such a pivotal moment that he has kept that. And you're right, it's such a throwaway moment. And then when you sit back and think about it, you're like, oh my God, this isn't like a birthday card or something that's been stashed somewhere. He has kept this business card pristine and kept it safe so that he can show Daniel it. I also love, by the way, that it's a business card with absolutely nothing on it, just his name. It doesn't show that it's not like he's an entrepreneur, it's just his name in gold, which is so Lestat. I love that. Why would it be anything else? He doesn't have a job. So brilliant. And this is the first episode that has sort of, because we don't see Lestat or killing people until the scene at the end, but this is the one that does sort of the first and I suppose only sort of full horror moment where we see the lamplighter get killed. And then they don't
hmm.
bother with that for the rest of the series because it's like, yeah, vampires eat humans, what of it?
Yeah, it's like it's got. I guess they've got to have it in there for the people that like. Well, I thought this had vampires in it. So far we've just had a load of people like talking and flirting with each other. So yeah, they have to give them that sort of like. It's the pilot. They've got to hook them in. So they give them that little like, oh, but look, something is eating all these people, and then we can by the end of the episode that's all been sort of like out of the way, and then we can get back into the actual drama of the piece.
Yeah, and it's a really short scene as it should be, but it's the only one that you're right, it does feel placed to bring people in, to be like, in case anyone was like, hang on a second, we're about 20-25 minutes in, nobody's been eaten yet. And
Yeah.
just in case they were worried, because it does feel slightly out of place with everything else that they do, which is pure, beautiful gothic horror. And we've got romantic gothic horror, of course. Then we move on to the card scene, which I think is hilarious in many levels. We have Lestat with his little tiny baby ponytail and his cigarette holder. And I'm just like, Louis, my sweet, beautiful, angelic child, why are we not concerned by Lestat talking to you telepathically? He freezes time, Louis. He freezes the entire room. Why does this not freak you out? If I was there, I would have freaked the fuck out and been out of that room in 10 seconds. This guy is frozen, everybody. Louis like, ah, he's so pretty.
And I think that's what it is. I think I think he's kind of he's definitely attracted to Lestat at this point, and I think it is just when you are in those first like throes of a crush, and I guess in those throes of increasing wonder, to get back to the episode title, I think you do kind of like overlook, you overlook red flags from the person and stuff. And I
Yeah.
guess this is Louis' version of that. He's completely missing the red flags that, hang on a minute, like nobody else is moving and he is talking, but in my brain. But he's hot, so why not?
Because he just says he's got tricks. And I think the pilot episode script is out there somewhere. And I think initially there was a little bit more of sort of voodoo and everything else, and a suggestion that Louis' worldview was much wider, so that Lestat doing this wasn't necessarily a huge shock to him, that it kind of fit within his worldview that, yeah, okay, people can do this. The pilot episode is a script is also much, much, much more explicit in terms of the sequence with Lestat, Lily, and Louis, which is interesting. I'm not really surprised that that got cut down to what it was. But yeah, I think it's just like, oh, hey, Lestat's here. And he's saying nice things to me. And he's, telling me that I should value myself and appreciate my worth and saying all the wonderful things that I want to hear. Because Louis, the one thing I thought again when I was rewatching it last night is that Louis is his family and he has everyone that works for him. But who are Louis's friends?
Yeah.
Louis doesn't have any friends, and that made me really, really sad. He doesn't have anybody, but Lestat is his friend. They spend when he says that Lestat was his cold winter fire. They spend months before Lestat makes a move, which is probably the most patient we ever see Lestat throughout the rest of the series. Just being friends, hanging out on Jackson Square. We don't really get much of a time frame, but we get the impression that Lestat effectively courts him for months before
Mm.
they actually get together. And I love that we have Louis playing like dress up Ken doll with Lestat, taking him to his tailors and updating his wardrobe and making sure he looks beautiful. Uh, and that's again another little throwaway moment, but he is in his own way kind of it's a possessive thing because everything that Lestat wears and the things that Lestat puts in his townhouse are Louis' suggestions, which of course Lestat loves, because why would Lestat not love wearing something that Louis has told him to wear or putting things in his house that Louis loves? But it's also kind of shows that sort of degree of mutual obsession from the get-go. Um, and obviously Louis' family recognize that, which gives the single best line in the entire series. He ain't white, he French, which is amazing. When he's talking to Grace about how he is spending way too much time with Lestat. And then we get the family dinner scene, which I love. I think it's brilliant. I love that Lestat has dressed up in his beautiful Sunday best to come and see Louis' horrible family.
I read that the look is very like one of the famous images of Oscar Wilde. He's kind of come to
Oh,
dinner dressed as Oscar Wilde, um, just in case it wasn't any more obvious of his sexual leanings. And yeah, I mean, I love a good awkward dinner scene in a TV show or film, and this one is up there with just everybody saying inappropriate things to everybody, and Louis just kind of, I mean, he's bringing his potential suitor home to meet the family. He wants it to go well, and it goes spectacularly bad.
I love that when you see Jacob Anderson in the background of several shots, he's literally kind of biting his lip awkwardly, like, can we all just get along? He is so nervous about introducing Lestat to them. And you're right, Lestat's dressed up and he's got his little beautiful boutonniere. He has an emerald green ring, which I think is interesting that they decked him out in an emerald green ring for that particular scene because Anne Rice wrote a very famous Facebook post about how she had envisaged Lestat and Louis' wedding, and she made a huge deal of them having emerald engagement rings.
Ah.
So yeah, he is dressed like in Sunday best. My favorite thing is that Paul clocks them immediately. Like Paul may not be well. Paul is, we are, I think, supposed to guess that Paul is schizophrenic. But Paul is not an idiot. Paul takes one look at Lestat and is like, why have you brought your boyfriend to dinner? Why have you brought a boy? Why have you brought a white boy to our house? He knows instantly. And then he asks Lestat about religion, and we get this. I mean, again, Lestat, I love him, but I mean, the man has so many personality disorders. He just immediately trauma dumps this horrendous backstory from the Vampire Lestat, where he did go to monastery and he loved it there and he was so happy. And they were teaching him to read. And then his family, well, his father and his brothers drag him back and beat him and starve him and everything until he agrees that he won't go back there. And it's horrific. But again, this is a polite family dinner. We do not immediately go into trauma dumping onto Louis's poor family. And I mean, I keep saying horrible family. I like Grace. I feel that Grace does the best she can with a situation that is just a bit beyond her. Her brother isn't, I mean, I don't know if she understands the concepts of vampirism, but she knows that Louis isn't right. And then at some point, Louis acquires a teenage daughter. And the whole thing is it's just more than she needs in her life. So, yeah, at some point, I feel that Grace does, I mean, particularly in 1910 as a black woman, she's not having a fun life, is she?
No,
She's doing the
that's
best
fair.
that she can. This is a whole house of lies because we see them in their fancy bed. It's never really clear to me how well off Louis's family are because he says that his father drove them into the ground. So any money they have purely comes from Louis's whoring activities. And presumably, once he gets with Lestat, the money comes from the fair play, which they jointly own. So they are presumably always one step away from bankruptcy. And then Grace is obviously relying on her husband for his money. I mean, she's got no job of her own. She's entirely reliant on the men in her life for income. And her brother gets married to an insane white man, doesn't age, and then brings an equally insane teenage daughter into the mix, who is a bloodthirsty demon. I don't really blame Grace for just piecing out at a certain point and being like, you know what, Louis, you're dead. We're just gonna move on, have a nice life, boring life somewhere else. You, you do you with this crazy. I don't want to know. So yeah, I have a lot of sympathy for Grace.
Yeah, she's very much the peacekeeper of the family, right from like the early breakfast scene. I mean, even this Paul comes for Lestat, but he also comes for Grace's fiance too, because like he has to refer to their mother as mother, and he's like, she ain't your mother yet, because they're not
Yeah,
married yet, and so it's just a very just. I think her whole life is just stopping people fighting, and then she goes on to have more than one child, which I can guarantee will then result in even more peacekeeping. So yeah, I think just at
yeah.
some point being able to sort of like push Louis and his his craziness sort of like out of the way. It's kind of just yeah, she needs a rest.
She does, she does. I think yeah, I feel for Grace, and I think that she's very well portrayed by the actress that plays her. I think she does the best she can with it with a small part, and she is, I think, the one bright spot in Louis' family, but at the same time, I don't think she can still entirely embrace him for all that he is. And I think that's the real sadness there. I think that the Pont de Lac family is all about front. It's all about them having these dinner, very formal breakfasts, very formal dinners in this beautiful house that was built, well, initially from slavery and now from pimping. And there probably isn't very much money there. And it's all front. They're all pretending to not know what Louis does and to not know who Louis is. And I don't think he feels seen. And that's where, when the stat comes along, he does. And I think that's what's so beautiful And then that leads us on to obviously the sex scene, which is incredible. I love that Lestat knows he's not going to get Louis through the door without Lily. So he's sort of got Lily there as a ruse. And I mean, he's
Mm.
so ridiculously horny from the second he gets in. He is yearning for this man. Like, there are these multiple scenes of Sam Reid reaching for and not quite touching Louis in that sequence when they are in the Rue Royale with Lily, when he's sort of trailing his fingers just behind his neck. And it is so swooningly, ridiculously romantic. And Lily, again, she knows the deal. You know, she's happy to indulge for a little bit. Was it a bad night for Lily that she got to have a little sleep and be left alone? No. I think Lily again, well, until Lestat kills her, which again, bad Lestat. Why did we not leave Lily alone? So the problem with Lestat, he is like, there's no plan. He's just vibes. He got hungry, so he ate Lily. It's like, why did we not have a little bit of a think that maybe, actually, Lily would have been a very strong supporter of Louis and probably of the two of you, Lestat? Why did we not stop to think?
I think he just has that sort of like toddler energy sometimes where, I think him and Louis are kind of after this night, Louis sort of distances himself and they're kind of fighting. And, Lestat knows that historically Louis has visited her. So it's like, yeah, if I can't have him, you can't either. Nah.
Yeah,
And so he kills her. But yeah, this scene is so good because it's like, Lily, she sees sort of like Louis's desire suddenly come out and she sort of says it's okay,
I
like
know. I love that. I
this
love
is
that.
fine.
I
Yeah.
love that she is non-judgmental. She is kind. She's so kind in that scene. She's like, it's okay, it's fine. And they have obscene chemistry. And it's quite rare because we're now in this really weird era where, and it's going to make me sound so old, the kids of today, but the youth are very anti-sex. I mean, when I was growing
Yes.
up in kind of the 80s and 90s, all of the anti-sex crusaders were, um, what I thought at the time, they probably weren't very old, but what I thought of as very old women who were prudish and unkind and very, had a very limited outlook on life. And these were the people railing against it. And now it's just teenagers, youth,
Yeah.
everybody, all the time it goes around, we want less sex, we want less sex, we should all be, um, you know, very asexual and all about the sort of the yearning, but without any actual sex. And it's so sad. I don't know whether it's because their generation has been so over sexualized in terms of the access to the internet from such a young age that it's actually prompted this different reaction. But sex is important in a loving relationship, and it is important in film to show the full breadth of human relationships. And I feel like if they had chickened out of the sex scene here, I don't think the show would have been as good as it was. I mean, I know that they don't have as much sex going forward. And I am a little sad that we didn't get to see Louis and Armand much in series two. And I know that's because they have a very different relationship. But again, it's very rare to see a black man and a South Asian man paired on screen. So it would have been nice
Mm.
to have seen sort of, you know, full representation there in terms of them getting an equally horny sex scene. But this is, yeah, the chemistry between these two is insane. The most important thing is that Louis reaches for him first. I mean, they're always their whole thing. Their scene is choreographed. That both of them are fighting for dominance, and I think that's such a key theme in their relationship. I think they are perfect for each other, but not at this point because Louis is not ready in anything. He's not ready to accept who he is as a person. He's not ready, certainly not ready to accept who he is as a vampire. And Lestat is just, as you said, sugar crazed toddler who doesn't really understand how to be in a relationship yet. I think it takes him years and terrible loss for them to both get to the point where they can start beginning to rebuild. And they are not at this point in this first episode. But Louis does reach for him, and it is beautifully shot and very sexy without, because I feel like sex scenes either go to, they're either really explicit and really dull, or they are I mean, my favorite thing is always the woman in the full makeup with the bra on. The full makeup thing is, we don't really get that here, but obviously because it's two gentlemen, but the full makeup sex thing in the middle of the night is always my favorite. It's like, no, she got rid of that as soon as she got in. The bra came off, the makeup came off, and then she went to bed. Like, why is she wearing full slap? The whole thing is ridiculous. But again, Louis, my angel, how did you not notice you're floating? His dick is simply not that good. You are floating several feet off the ground, Louis.
I will admit that my first experience with this scene was hampered. I think I mentioned on the introduction episode, because it was about this point when the window cleaners turned up, and I did not have my curtains shut. And yeah, I don't know what they thought I was watching, but it's like that as the snapshot of them seeing would have definitely got them talking later on down the route, I'm sure. But yeah, on a on a rewatch, I've got to got to appreciate it more for what it is, because it is, there's this love scene, but it's also like the reveal of Lestat's vampirism, because there's
Mm.
the bloodletting. This is the first time that happens, and it's, what is it? It's the little death, and apparently the little death is like the most amazing thing ever, especially your first time.
Yeah, because Louis describes it, what does he describe it? It's like the black tar over the gates of Orion or something. Basically, he says it's like the best drug he's ever had. But again, Lestat is, his mouth is covered in blood. He's looking at you like he will die if he doesn't get to spend the rest of his life with you. And Louis is just like, oh, this is just a thing that happened. Louis's ability to compartmentalize and just roll with whatever is happening in any moment is truly astounding, because he's floating, the guy's ripped his neck open. Louis is just like, oh, well, he's French. These are the things that happen. He just chills. And it is beautifully lit, it's candle lit. They both look incredible in it. I mean, I always feel for actors, because I can't imagine how sex scenes are the remotest bit fun to shoot. I imagine you
No.
probably have to, I mean, if you're not starving yourself, you probably need to spend the entire week working out what you are eating, what you are not eating, to ensure you don't look bloated on camera. And then with this, particularly doing a love scene that requires stunts and being
Yeah.
naked in front of everybody. Um, well, I mean, I think that's the kind of thing that either makes or breaks an on-screen partnership, and I think it's clearly absolutely made theirs. They are obviously very, very close, Sam Reid and Jacob Anderson, but I mean, I imagine it takes a tremendous amount of self-possession not to just die of mortification when you're filming something like that. And it is beautiful. It looks absolutely beautiful on the screen, and we get some sex scenes since, but we don't get quite that level again. But it is important for it to be sort of the coming together of these two souls, I think. Um, and it is a wonderful scene. Then we get Lestat in his beautiful gold gown, the dressing gown afterwards, as Louis is leaving, which doesn't come back until the series 2 finale, and slightly broke me when it did. I am such a sap when it comes to these things. We then move to Grace's wedding, which is both lovely and then has this truly horrific ending. And the whole sequence of Paul and Louis on the rooftop is beautiful. The sort of, you've got the sunrise behind them. I think that I was rewatching it last night, and the point at which broke me and I started crying was when Paul says to him, Daddy said I was going to look down on you for all of our days, when he's talking about being taller than Louis. And then in the series 2 finale, you see that he has put the portrait of Paul on his wall above the Zen garden. And I was just like, oh, sobs. I thought that was beautiful. But again, this is an insane degree of meticulousness to have that throwaway line and then bring that back in the form of the portrait in the last episode. I mean, the man must have like a Bible, Rolin Jones, that he's written all of this to have every single line like this come back and pay off episodes later.
What do we think about Paul's actions? Is this Paul unable to deal with his illness, and this is him, getting out of that existence? Or, he mentions that he hits the stat in his head. Louis has been distancing himself because obviously he's still not okay with his sexuality. And is this, Lestat, has he done a little bit of mind control, and has he implanted this idea into Paul? And is that why Paul does it? Because he kind of knows that without that tether of his brother, of his family, that he might be willing to come and see him again.
I am very, very firmly Team Lestat in this situation because Louis does ask him about this in a later episode, and he looks so hurt. I I just don't think Paul was well. I think Paul was schizophrenic in a time when they wouldn't have had the slightest clue how to deal with somebody like him, other than you know put him in an institution, which they mention, because that presumably they wouldn't have been the drugs or the treatment. So this is a man who probably, if he'd had the degree of treatment that was available today, would have lived a perfectly fine life,
Mm.
but didn't. He's probably bipolar, probably schizophrenic, suffering with voices in his head. I don't think that Lestat did anything to Paul whatsoever. I think that Lestat, from from that first dinner party when Louis shouts at him and says, "You don't do that shit, not with me, not with my family." I think Lestat knew that Louis's family was completely off limits. Lily, fine. Lily's not family. But Louis's family, I mean, he didn't, they never killed, Lestat never killed his mother. And Louis's mother is horrific to Louis. I think I think this was Paul realizing that he was a burden and almost trying to make it better for Louis and better
Mm.
for those around him, and damning Louis in the process, because he tells Paul that he loves him just before Paul jumps, and then he never says it again. He says it to Armand, and we can have many, many discussions when the time comes about the depth of Louis's love for Armand. I think it does a disservice to Louis's character to suggest that he never loved him, because I do think that he did, but not in the same way. And we never see him say, he never says the words to Lestat, and he never says the words to Claudia either. He never says,
Mm.
"I love you." Um, but no, I don't think Lestat had anything to do with Paul's death. If you ask Sam Reid, he will give you many paragraphs to that level. He is very firmly, and I mean, obviously, what an actor says doesn't mean anything. The show could go in a different way, but no, I don't think that Lestat, for all that he is, for all that he is petulant, and for all that he does try to keep Louis with him, and we get into that. And it's really interesting the way the baby trapping switches when we get into the second series, because we think that Lestat kind of baby traps Louis with Claudia, and then we realize that it was actually Louis begging for Claudia to be turned. And he certainly tries to keep them with him, Claudia especially, by limiting their knowledge and trying to make them reliant on him, because of course he pays for everything. At the point at which they become together, he co-owns the fair play, but I imagine in that time that meant he probably just owned it, because I'm not sure what Louis would have been allowed to own, but they are living basically off Lestat's money, his seemingly inexhaustible money from France, which I can't imagine that Lestat has been clever enough to invest it. So I just feel like this is just years worth of interest that Lestat is living on, because I feel like Lestat would have spent this on magic beans. He's not stupid, but I feel like he just, like, business would bore him. So I feel like the law firm has done very well for him. Um, but no, I don't think that Lestat would ever have killed any of Louis's family to keep him with him. I think he would have known that that was the line he could never ever cross. Even as idiotic as he is at times, I don't think he has anything to do with Paul's death.
That's fair.
And I mean, Louis's mother is horrific in the after effects of this. She blames Louis for it, which is awful. I think it's just a way. I think it's just an excuse for her. I don't think she. I think it's Paul's death is a helpful excuse to kind of lever Louis out of the family, because you can't tell me that Paul, with his mental illnesses and the institute that they'd already hidden him away in, was a son that she relished and was proud of and would wanted to show off, because a woman like that in that time, Paul would have been the awful family secret that they wanted to hide. So this is just a way to lever Louis out of the family. But then we have Lestat at the funeral, and it's like, oh, again, what are you doing? He's like, Mon cher, I noticed that you have not been near me. I am sad. Would you like my cock? It's like, Lestat, it's his brother's funeral. It's his
Yeah.
brother's funeral, Lestat. Leave him alone. But no, he feels it's perfectly okay to indulge in a moment of histrionics about his abandonment issues at Louis's brother's funeral. It's like, this is not the time, my sweet, beautiful angel. This is not the time. And then we have the church scene. And this is where I get so frustrated that genre just does not get the respect that it deserves.
Yeah.
Because you cannot tell me that Jacob Anderson in that confessional is not better than any actor that has won the best drama award over the past few years. I'm sorry, he is astonishing in that sequence.
Yeah. And I think that's what the show does so well. And we're seeing it right from the pilot is monologues. Monologues are so tricky to get right anywhere, especially in television and film, because,
Yep.
often it's just the camera locked on that actor. There's no like shiny, pretty things to divert. It's just on them. And if you don't have that talent as an actor to be able to sort of like break through, then it's just going to be really dull and boring. But his performance in that confessional is just so incredible, because we've seen him up until this point, as you said, compartmentalizing everything, and then suddenly the floodgates are open and he is confessing every little thing that he has done to this priest. And I think it was the church scene. I'd already, I was already enjoying the pilot
Yeah.
up until this point, but it was this church scene that I was like, okay, yeah, I need to like watch the second episode like immediately after this.
I mean, he's just, when he says he's got his spindly roots in me, I mean, it's just such an incredible performance, because poor Louis in that moment, he's completely suicidal. His mother has rejected him. His brother has killed himself in front of him. He hates who he is. He thinks that he is wrong, that his family is rejecting him because of his sexuality. He's just drowning in shame and pain and agony. And I mean, again, he's in a church and he's in a confessional, and what relief or would he have ever have gotten from a church at that time, from, a white priest at that time? He wouldn't have. I mean, this is how desperate Louis is, that he is trying to reach out to anyone for some degree of comfort. He wants to relieve his burden, and he's in a terrible, terrible way. And then Lestat just comes crashing in, and it goes full gothic horror as he kills the priests. I mean, the sequence where he puts his fist through the priest's head, I mean, so clever in that we can see how quickly the priest is running, and Lestat is just, of course, gently strolling along. And it's a very graphic scene, because obviously Lestat is covered in blood, and Rice did not like her vampires covered in blood. She preferred them to be meat eaters. And I mean, it's terribly sad that she passed before she got to see this. I think there would have been things that she would have had very, very strong opinions about. And I feel it would be, I know that they signed some sort of contract that she wasn't allowed to talk much about it, which would not have stopped her, would not have stopped her in a million years, I don't think. So I would have loved to have seen the many Facebook posts she would have done about this series. I feel like she would have loved Sam and Jacob. I don't think she would have loved how messy eaters they are. I'm not and I feel she would have had many, many issues with the drop, which we will talk about in a later episode. But I feel that that would have been, I feel that might have been a breaking point for her. But yeah, we've got Lestat covered in blood, absolutely. But I also love the little moment of, oh shit, he's panicking. I'm covered in blood. I need to make myself look less scary, because he immediately gets rid of the coat that he's wearing and like wipes his, like a toddler, wipes his mouth free of all the blood so that he can talk to Louis and make his plea to Louis, not looking as scary, even though Louis at this point has full on stabbed him in the back 3 times, and the
Yeah.
stats, not even blinked at this. And how long would you have held out for that pitch? How long? If you had Lestat in front of you declaring his undying love, how long would you have held off before you said yes?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hell of a pitch, isn't it? Was it's like, swap this life of shame for a dark gift, and I mean, but I think what's important though is that that we said, Lestat he's taken his time with Louis. It's been months
Yeah,
before, he invited Lily. He could have invited Lily over, like the first week that they knew each other and tried it on, but he
yeah,
didn't. He wanted
done.
Louis to feel comfortable with that, and even in this scene, I think this is something that is missing from the original film with Lestat's changing of Louis. He kind of I think he asks if, he maybe briefly asks Louis if he wants this life, and like a
Yeah,
drunk Louis is like, yeah, sure. But in this, Lestat is very clear in getting that consent,
yeah,
which is interesting. It's like we've seen him already be, like you say, a little bit petulant, and he throws his toys out when Louis doesn't talk to him as often as he wants and stuff. But he's being very clear about consent, because as we later learn, that isn't something that was presented to Lestat. So even in this moment where he's
yeah,
appearing so monstrous with punching a priest like through the face, and obliterating him, he is still being far kinder than anybody else in Louis' life has ever been. He's giving him a choice and is making sure that, this what you want? Because if it is, I am here and I will do everything for you.
yeah, absolutely. Because yeah, Lestat's turning was not consensual, and I'm going to be interested to see to what extent they portray that in series three.
Mm.
I think with the choices that they have made with Claudia, that the scene between him and Magnus is going to be portrayed as a literal rape, I suspect. And it's either way terrific. He was not asked, it was forced upon him. And here, yeah, he's angry and he's furious. I love Sam Reid's line reading of feeble, degenerate God. It's incredible. But yeah, he takes his time and he says, look, I want you. I want you to be with me forever. I can make you feel happy. I see you, Louis. I love you.
Mm.
I see you. You are loved. I bring my love back to you. It's swooningly, ridiculously, obscenely romantic. And you're right, he's taken his time. He's spent months with Louis. Is this as well particularly well thought out? No, because it's Lestat, so of course he's murdered 2 priests. But he also knows that Louis is suicidal, so he has no other option at this point.
Yeah.
So he's making his pitch, and he's making his pitch on an altar, and it's sacred and completely profane. And again, Louis is the one that reaches for him first. Louis is the one that reaches for him and says yes. And Lestat is so careful with his little tiny baby teeth as he's biting Louis. And it is the most beautiful, ridiculous scene as they get married on that altar, surrounded in blood and death. And Louis is reborn anew.
We've said it many times, but it's just a hell of a first episode. Again, there is, knowing that they were doing the TV format, there is a version of this where the pilot episodes ends on the sex scene, or ends in the
Yeah,
reveal that Lestat is a vampire. But it doesn't, it pays itself really, really well in holding
yeah,
back until a certain point. But the fact that by the end of the first episode, Louis has already been turned, it's showing that audience who isn't necessarily familiar with Anne Rice. It's like, no, we're getting to the vampire bit It's out of the
Yeah,
way now. Let's focus on this story because of the, I mean, I'm doing a lost rewatch at the minute, and it's, I'm nearly at the end of series one, and I've got no answers to any of the questions about what's going on
yeah,
this island. I don't think I'm going to
yeah.
by the end of series five, from what I remember. But this is very quick to set up this relationship so that then the rest of the series can then be spent exploring the intricacies of that rather than just like, well, how did he get made a vampire?
Yeah, because the vampirism becomes secondary. I
Yeah.
mean, series one is about a toxic relationship and parenting skills, or indeed lack thereof. And series two is basically about gaslighting and office politics
Yeah.
and how badly Louis fails at office politics, because I do feel that series two would have gone very differently if anybody had understood group dynamics a little better. But yeah, we immediately get the vampirism and the need for, the scary lamplighter scene out of the way straight away, so that we can just get on to the completely messy love triangle and all of these people trying and failing dismally to have some sort of normal relationship within the context of this very extraordinary life.
And it's such a good first thing. I think this episode is 63 minutes, which is obviously one of the longer in the
Yeah.
show's run, but it doesn't remotely feel that long. Like I say, I've watched this three times now, and at no point have I been clock watching and being like, oh God, why isn't it over? The minutes just kind of just melt by.
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. And I mean the confidence to wait until minute 17 of that to bring in Lestat to have him say his first word. I feel like any other pilot would have introduced Lestat in the first 5 minutes, because they would be so terrified of, oh my God, if we don't immediately get Lestat and Louis together. Whereas it really takes its time setting up 1910s New Orleans, setting up Dubai, setting up Rashid without telling us who Rashid is, not even giving him his fake name, just having him be this omnipresence from minute one. And then, yeah, just setting up all this foreshadowing that won't be paid off for episodes. And just, as you said, taking its time, but in a way that as the viewer, you are never like, can we get on with it? Where's the stat? Like, you're not watching it going, where's the stat? The stat comes into the story at the point at which he is meant to. You never feel like you are waiting for him to appear. You never feel that you're waiting for the vampirism reveal to appear. It just plays out exactly as it should. And it's a very, very skilled first episode.
Yeah, and I think before we wrap up, I just want to sort of like give a shout out to, as much as this is, very gothic and romantic, and there's still, there's suicide and death. It also has these great moments of humor, and I think we kind of have to give a shout out to kind of the MVP of the supporting cast, which is, Miss Briggs.
I love her so much, and I'm so sad that she vanishes after series one, because Bricktop is my absolute favorite. She is so funny. The actress is brilliant. She has the most incredible line delivery. It's, yeah, she is fantastic. She is an absolute joy. Her scene with the alderman is just absolutely pitch perfect comedy timing. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
And it sets up nicely the kind of the chaos of the whorehouse, where Louis is kind of, again, he's forever putting out other people's fires, and it's that whole thing of like he's got to please the white man while still keeping his girls happy. And yeah, so it is still pushing the story along, but just what that lady can do with her catfish dinner, very entertaining.
Oh, yeah, no, so grim, but very brilliant. Yeah, I love her. I love her. Again, I feel this is another series where I feel like if Louis had relied a little bit more on the incredible depth of the women in his life surrounding him, things might have been different. Louis needed some girls to instead he just sort of descends into multiple levels of crazy man. Bless him. thank you for listening. We've got many more episodes. It probably won't all be as long as this, but we love the series. We've got an awful lot to chat about. I can't wait to get into it. And if you want to keep up with us, we are on Twitter or X or whatever you feel like calling it, as Savage Garden, all one word with 0 on the end. And we are on Blue Sky at savage-garden at bsky.social.
Please do join us over on Blue Sky because, I think it needs a little bit more vampire love over there. It's a very nice place, but it's also a very vanilla place at the moment, it feels, and we kind of
Indeed. We need
we
some
need a
more
little bit of
we need
spice.
more little bit more spicy gothic love over there. The Interview with the Vampire fandom is quite strong on there, and we would very much love for you to come and join us on this journey.
Yep. So yeah, join us again in a fortnight where we'll be looking into the season 1 second episode, After the Phantoms of Your Former Self.